Most of you are CTG supporters, and if you're not, you will be after today. My name is Michael Ritchie. I'm the artistic director, and I want to welcome you to this afternoon's event on this lovely Saturday. And I'm very happy, but not surprised, to see the turnout. I also want to take a moment to thank our hosts, Erica and Vin de Bona, for having all of us here. And to talk a little bit about why we're here. We have a great opportunity here, which is why CTG joined in on this. We're here to hear a conversation with Chuck Fries about his life and his career in television. And he has got a book out. It's gone already. There it is, the small book. Godfather of the Television Movie, A History of Television. I was lucky enough to get a copy of this book a few weeks ago. And I read a lot. I mean, I read for pleasure, but I also read for work. I read probably 200, 250 scripts a year. So I'm constantly have this pile of scripts in front of me that I need to read, and I fight my way through a lot of them. When I got this book, I put it on the corner of my desk, and I have to tell you the truth, my stack of scripts has not gone down at all, because every opportunity I have to read, I'm reaching for the book and reading it. And it's a fascinating book. It's a personal history. It's an understanding of the art of making television, the business of making television, and the craft of it. But what is most touching to me about it is all of the relationships that you read about in it. With Chuck in particular, and the many, many hundreds of people that he had the chance to work with, and the dozens, if not hundreds, of movies that he was responsible for. So it's a real pleasure to have him here, to have Vin with us to lead us through a conversation. As I understand it, there will be some other guest speakers somewhere in the mix.
Yes, yes.
Do we have books for sale somewhere here? We're not allowed to do that. We do? Funnily enough, we do. And,
suspects right
yes.
here in the front.
And I will urge you to pick one up. And are we signing?
Chuck is signing.
Chuck
absolutely.
is signing. All right, good. So bonuses all along the way. So let's welcome Vin and Chuck, A History of Television.
Michael, thank you very much. And it's such a pleasure to be here on this pre-Super Bowl day for such a wonderful event. Chuck has been such a dear friend. Chuck and Ava have been dear friends for maybe the past 15 years. And it's a thrill for me to help guide you through today and talk about this wonderful book. I really would love to thank, and please stand up, sweetheart, my dear wife, Erica, for helping us participate today. Now, this is the book we're talking about. And it says, Chuck Fries, Godfather of the Television Movie. I would have made one change. I would have made Supreme Godfather.
I like that. I like that.
As Michael said, it's really such a great read. Chuck has the most amazing total recall of all the movies he's made, all the people he's worked with, and great stories. Now, it may surprise you that in our business, when we go to work and produce shows, we have a plan. That plan never works out. And so what is so wonderful about this book is seeing how Chuck maneuvers, not only in negotiations in his career, but how he goes to work with that plan and how he brings it to fruition and makes things work. I mean, the guy makes television movies, and he does it so well. But the interesting thing is, he started in 1950, and just this last week, Chuck and I went to Boston, where he launched his play, The Color of Rose, at Emerson College in the New Theater. And it's a great play. It's about Rose Kennedy, and it's three Roses on stage at the same time. Rose Kennedy, the young mother, Rose Kennedy, the middle-aged woman who has gone through the assassination of two sons, and Rose Kennedy, the senior, who is about to go on television and talk about her life. And all three Roses get to hear their stories and conflicting stories together. So he still has not stopped. He will never stop. And God bless him.
And that's what, I got to go. I didn't get to go. And unfortunately, Ava was ill, so I went back with Ben and my assistant, who's my eyes and my ears. But I'd like to just take this minute to introduce my lovely wife, Ava, who has been very supportive and was also instrumental in helping us to arrange this today. Ava. And the woman who really helped me put this together finally, the final editor that worked with me, Linda Schreier. Linda, where are you?
I'm here.
They're just right there.
And the woman who gave me the first interview on this book and interviewed me on the other book I did on John F. Kennedy is here. Connie Martinson. Connie, where are you, dear? There she is. She does. You get a print interview, you get a tape interview, you get everything with Connie. I'm sorry her husband isn't here because I always introduced him. Her husband, Les Martinson, directed P-2-109, the movie that was about John F. Kennedy and his experiences in the Navy. So, Vincent, I'll turn it back to you.
I'm going to...
excuse me, one thing. I want to thank Finn and Erica also for sponsoring this.
That's the way it's going to be.
No, I got to get my thanks in. You know, I got to get my thanks in, and I want you to know how much Ava and I appreciate you and the friendship we've had with you. You know what's always great when two guys get along and their wives get along? That makes it good.
We're even going to dinner after this, so those things are. So I want to go back to Cincinnati. In the 1820s, the Freeze family came to Ohio, and his great-grandfather great-great-grandfather had 10 children. His grandfather, great-grandfather had 10 children. But his dad and mom...
And my grandfather had...
And your grandfather, yes. But his dad and mom had made a decision. They were going to have 2 children. And so they bought a house where they had enough room for 2 children. And then the 11-pound Chuck Freeze came along as a bouncy new baby. And he wound up, for the first 22 years of his life, living in the sewing room, which was 6 by 6.
You wouldn't believe it, would you?
And so you know, that's why when Ava and Chuck go to a hotel, they get the damnedest big suite they can, because he's getting even for the early days. Chuck...
and Ava and I have 10 kids.
That's right. That's right. Chuck says that when he looks back at his high school and college years, he considered himself a playboy. That's what he says in the book. So we may hear a little bit about that. But, you know, I think the first question I want to ask you is, your father was in the produce business. You did a lot of heavy work in your early childhood, lifting bags and toting things. You created the first, you were responsible for producing the first prom at your high school. And you did a lot of things in college and during high school. What do you think might have been an event that prepared you for your work as a producer in your early days?
Well, the prom was great training because we told the principal that we were going to put up the money, but we sold all the tickets before we had to put up a dime. So we made the prom without investing a dime. That's good practice for being a producer. I think my uncle, who also saw me kind of doing all these things and who was a great Irish tenor, we used to sing together all the time. He was really the man who brought me out. It was nepotism and from square one. But I had an uncle who'd come to California who made, I didn't realize this till I researched on the book, that he'd actually produced 6 pictures for 20th Century Fox. Double feature stuff, you know, Laurel and Hardy, and Ann Rutherford was in one, Lloyd Nolan. And so I kind of had some feeling, and my mother was very creative. She was always having us play a trumpet. My sister played a violin, and we were always performing when people came to our house. I think one of the other things that helped me, of course, I think the business, working with my father, was very good from an entrepreneurial standpoint. And also, when I went to college, I got into a fraternity, and I really learned to meet with a lot of guys. These guys all were coming back from the service, you know. And so they were well trained. I mean, they'd been through the wars. And that, and also Ohio State was an ROTC school. You had, it was a land-grant college. So I went through ROTC for 4 years. And I think those two things, in addition to the training I had before that, were the most formative aspect of my life. I'm telling you, I loved my fraternity. I loved my fraternity. I really did.
You still go back to?
I just talked to my fraternity brother yesterday. He lost his wife on Tuesday, and I just talked to him. And who called me but the wife of another fraternity brother? So, I mean, we stayed in touch all these years, and I think that's been a very important part of the fabric and texture of what kind of makes me tick. And another thing, my friend Bob Remy here, where are you, Bob? Bob Remy's here. He's a Cincinnati boy, too.
So
I'll try to make my answer short.
Aside from producing 120 movies, what gave you the right to write this book, do you think?
Give me what?
Why did you write this book?
Well, you know, I read a lot of obituaries. And I noticed they often refer to the memoirs of the books that people write. So I thought I'd have a mouth there for the guy who's ever going to write my obituary. You get my age, you read the obituary page. That's usually number 1. Anyway, the truth of the matter is, I wanted to do 2 things. First of all, I thought I had something to say. I thought I had something to say about the history of television. Because truthfully, I really got here early. I mean, it was here in 1952. And Lucy was just starting at that time. And they were, you know, standard telescriptions were making 3-minute episodes like they were webisodes or something. And I thought the other thing was, I wanted my children and my grandchildren, now great-grandchild coming, to know who I was and what I did, you know. And it's truthfully, as you know, you can live with all these people and go to work every day, and they don't really always know just what's going on in your life. So I thought I'd put it down so that they would be able to have something, take a look at that sometime down, show it to their kids. This is your grandpa. This is your great-grandpa.
What a great idea.
That's it.
Yeah. In 1952, when you came here, it was really kind of a result of a fellow named Fred Ziv, who was a Cincinnati ad man, came to the West Coast and started a company called Ziv Productions. Ziv was a syndication company. Now, in those days, there were 3 networks and very little syndication. A syndication company took their own programs and sold them independently all around the country. And Fred Ziv's company was famous for low-budget, high-quality productions. Listen to the shows that they did. Boston Blackie, Cisco Kid, both shot, by the way, in color, way before color TV. So Fred Ziv had the idea that someday, when television had different ways to do things, those color shows would work for him. He also had Highway Patrol with Broderick Crawford, 10-4, 10-4. I Led 3 Lives, a story about a double agent, science fiction theater, and this show that was shot mostly in Florida, I think, called Sea Hunt. And Chuck was really the fellow who was signed on to oversee the production, keep it on budget, keep it on schedule, make the shows work. What was the Ziv formula?
It was a very male-oriented formula. I'll tell you, I went through the IMDb, I found 1 woman writer that worked for Ziv. Well, I guess I was there for 800 episodes. And there was 1 writer, Teddy Sherman, whose father was Pop Sherman, who did have Long Cassidy's. And I couldn't find another one. We only had one show, 2 shows. We had Meet Corliss Archer, which had a woman in it. We had Bold Venture, which had a woman in it. Every other show was male-oriented, generally action. Mackenzie's Raiders, Richard Carlson out in the battle scene on the Texas Rio Grande River, Man Called X. All these shows were action-oriented male shows. And at the time, most of these lead actors were born around 1910, 1915. And Fred Ziv had kind of a crazy idea, which was, in his mind, was very smart, I think it was. All the lead actors got a piece of the gross and never got a piece of the net. He had two reasons for that. One, he wanted to attract them to television because he wanted to get Rod Crawford and these kind of guys to do television. Secondly, he didn't want anybody to know what the pictures cost because he didn't want anybody in the stations to know that we were spending $15,000 to make a 35 millimeter color half-hour episode for Richard Carlson called "I Led 3 Lives." So he was a very, very smart man. He was a very bright man, but he would never come to California. There's one other thing which I think some of you will understand. He never, ever made a press release in the business. If the Ziv company ever got into trade papers, it was because somebody picked up something and printed it on their own. He never issued a press release. He didn't want anybody to know what the hell he was doing. It was a secret business.
I heard there was a thing called a Ziv entrance, where if he used a camera shooting on an angle, he could save a backdrop behind it so that was one less flat on the set he'd have to build. I don't know if it's true. That's what I heard. In the 60s, you move on to Columbia Screen Gems. I'm going to just, you got to remember these shows. Father Knows Best. And he was the guy who was watching over all these. Naked City, Donna Reed Show, Dennis the Menace, Route 66, Hazel, I Dream of Jeannie, The Monkees, and The Flying Nun. What was it like those days?
Yeah, well, those were good days. You know, the Ziv company, everything was really short money, there's no question. I mean, we paid people $70 a day. That was the minimum. And that's what they got in many, many cases. But, you know, at Screen Gems, we made, I thought I was moving up a notch. Although Screen Gems Columbia was not necessarily the most important studio in town. You know, they used to say these guys live on Gower Gulch over there. But we were doing network shows, and that was really a move up. And I learned a lot there. But I also got to utilize all that stuff that I'd learned at Ziv, you know, because when we were going to make a syndicated show at Screen Gems, go on practical locations and all that, I knew that cold, and I had a great time there. I moved into the theatrical department for a couple of years, but it was a family operation. I mean, it was a political family situation. If you weren't in the family, of course, somebody thought they were in a family. Half the time they weren't in a family. You know, you thought you were in, you were out. You may be out, you might be in. But in the final analysis, it just didn't work out. I said, hey, wait a minute, I'm at a dead end here. I got to get out of this situation, which I did by bringing about some kind of a confrontation that somebody had to take action, and they took it, and I said, I'm happy. So I moved on from there.
I'm not sure I would want to be in a confrontation with Chuck Freeze. So then you move on to John Kluge hires you to go over to Metro Media. You produce Tales of the Crypt and a couple of other things, but it really gives you the opportunity to step out from being a guy who's watching the dollars on the production to a guy who now starts producing his own movies. Tell me about it. Was that a difficult step for you?
They thought I was coming in there to be my friend Frank Real thought I was going to be the business executive. In the back of my mind, I was going to be a creative executive. When he saw the first picture with my screen credit on, there was an executive producer. He said, "What the hell's going on here?" I said, "Hey, I put this thing together. I was out on location. This is what I'm going to do." But before that, the interesting thing was that I had lunch with Greg Bowser, and he was Kirk Kerkorian's lawyer. Went to the bistro, he ordered Perrier. I never saw Perrier before in my life. He drank two of them. I thought, this guy's going to get drunk. I didn't know it was just water, you know? So I said, I want this job to run MGM. He said, I'm sorry, kid. No, I think he's going to give it to Jim Aubrey, but I want to make a suggestion to you. He said, you've been a studio executive. I represent a guy named Hal Wallace. He did Casablanca and all these movies. You be an independent producer. So when I went to Metro Media, they thought I was working for them, but I was working for myself to get to a point where I was going to have my own company.
Johnny Carson said he overheard an ingenue at the Beverly Hills Hotel order a Perrier and water once.
Greg Bouncer lived at the time when you couldn't live with a woman without him being engaged to her. He had 12 engagement rings.
So you produced well over 120 television movies. Where did you find your material? Did you have researchers? Were you reading paper? Were you reviewing books? Where did it come from?
I had a theory: if you get out in traffic, you're bound to get hit. So I got it from every source you can think of. And when we talk about these movies here, let's talk about the first picture, and you'll see where that picture came from. And talk about Valerie's movie, you'll see where that picture came from.
You were talking about the first movie that we had a clip from. It's Darien Harwood's film, Foster and Laurie. People were doing films on action adventures, but this was sort of a social consciousness movie. Tell me about that.
You're talking about Foster and Laurie?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, I met with Fred Silverman. He was the head of program for CBS. And I said, look, I'm pitching you stuff, and not much of it sticks. Give me something you want to do. So he handed me this book, and he said, here, Foster and Laurie, written by Al Silverman. This is something I'd like to put on the air. And it was a tough story, a very tough story, because it was a story about two cops who get sniped off the street in New York City. And so we hired an art writer, Al Rubin, a New York guy who knew his way around. And bingo, we had an order, but we had to cast it. And I have to tell you, in those days, headlining a young African-American guy who could be a star in a show was not an easy thing to do. It's only 35 years ago, but things were not the same. Dorian will tell you that, he knows. Anyway, the funny part of this is Eddie Boy Jr., who's my casting director, brings in Sylvester Stallone to play Perry King. And Stallone's sitting there, and, you know, Mr. Reed, I think I could really play this role. You know, I could knock this thing, man. But, you know, after he left, I said, Eddie, the guy's got a speech impediment. You know? So, fade out, fade in. I'm in New York, and I'm sitting in this Mabel Mercer thing, that little bar room outside the St. Cold bar, and Rex Reed comes in, and he said, I'm chatting with him. I said what I'm looking for, and he said, see the Betty Davis show. There's a guy in there, Darien Harwood. He'll knock your socks off. So I invited him up to the hotel because I didn't have time to go to this show. So I invited him up to the hotel room. He read, and the rest is history. You know, he's in the movie. He did a fantastic job. And
we have
Bill,
a clip.
a couple of clips. What we're showing here is the boys coming together, and then the bad part.
Okay, so you want to be assigned together. Why the neighborhood police team? You got it. Me? Hey, come on. Can you believe him? Head full of ideas, and now you don't even want to talk about them. Well, how about you? Well, see, the way I look at it, there are a lot of people that get into trouble for no reason except they don't have anything better to do. Now, if I'm out there on the street, I got at least a chance that somebody gonna pull my coattail and say, hey man, you better keep an eye on old Charlie over there. He getting ready to be uncool. And you see,
yeah, and then you see, if you know Charlie, on account of you know everybody on the block, you can go over to him and you can kind of pal him out, you know? And so you haven't made a collar, right? But maybe you stop somebody from punching out a super or busting into a candy store. And that's not so bad, right?
See what I mean? No, that's not so bad. Here I go. Who's this cousin?
Yeah, I was gonna ask you that.
Uh-huh. Does your wife know about this? You and the cat's cousin?
Why is he just...
You know what's gonna happen.
But y'all want to party!
And now the star of that wonderful movie, Darien Harwood, a wonderful working actor who has had a tremendous career and started off for a lot of young actors. And thank you very much. Please step up to the podium and tell us about it.
Oh, thank you, thank you. I'm just so thrilled to be here for Chuck, and I'm a fellow Buckeye, as I found out when I met Chuck. Actually, I started out as a singer in New York. I went to New York as a singer, and I had no idea of
Cincinnati Conservatory
yeah,
of Music.
yeah. I studied opera and musical theater and some other things at the conservatory. And I went to New York and had no thoughts of being an actor, but I did this musical with Betty Davis. And she's the one that talked me into trying acting. She said she liked my dramatic instinct, and she said, you know, you'd be cheating yourself if you wouldn't at least explore it. But we were doing a musical at the time. We were sold out in advance about 9 months before Broadway, and a musical version of a movie she had done called The Corn is Green. And the musical was called Miss Moffat, directed by, oh gosh, I'm trying to think of the director, terrific director. But anyway, it was that particular musical where I met Betty, and she said I should try it. So I said, well, after the run, maybe I'll take your advice, because obviously coming from you, I should at least consider it. The show closed out of town prematurely, so I took her advice and I auditioned for my first acting job. I'd never done it before, but I auditioned for a Broadway play called Don't Call Back, which starred Arlene Francis, and I auditioned for it and I got the role of the lead, playing this kind of gang member or something that takes over this apartment building. And it was terrific, I got the job, but the show opened and closed the same night. So that was pretty devastating. But fortunately for me, as Chuck had mentioned, Rex Reed was one of the critics that had seen the show, and he gave me this wonderful review and told Chuck. Fortunately, he met Chuck at the hotel and told him about me. And so I got to meet Chuck, and we talked, and he's responsible for the very first film job I ever got. And I'm totally indebted to you, Chuck, and it's been a great ride. And the great thing about it was, this was my first experience. I got to talk to Betty. You know, I was brought out here, I'd never done film before. She told me how to do it and gave me pointers. I would talk to her every night from here, talking to her at her place in Connecticut. And the great part about it was that as my first experience, I had a terrific producer, a terrific line producer as well, Art Stolnitz, a terrific director, and just a cast with Perry King that got me off on the right foot. So I was kind of on the job training for me, but I was certainly not set back at all by having the typical a-holes, as you know, in the business. So I really thank Chuck for that, and the Buckeyes keep going.
You know, standard fare of TV movies were biographies, action adventures, disease of the week. I think we all remember those. But you boldly ventured into a television movie that had a comedic bent. Why would you do that?
Well, a couple things. I made a movie called Human Feelings with Nancy Walker, played a female guy, and Billy Crystal played an angel who went down to Las Vegas to save the city. And it worked pretty good, you know. And I had these two fellows, Dee Caruso and Jerry Gardner, under contract. And they came up with this crazy idea, you know, about how to break up a happy divorce. Before that, they came up with a thing called the Lavender Car. It was a story of this car that went all through Beverly Hills that was lavender. It wasn't fun, you know. but this was fun. And I kind of go back, longer than Barbara and I would like to admit how far back we go. But, you know, when Barbara was cast, and Sidney Sheldon called her, famous author, called her to play Jeannie, and I Dream of Jeannie. she knocked everybody out because she came on screen and here was her belly button showing. And I'm telling you, those days, standards and practices, they really came down hard on this. But everybody persisted, and the rest of the show went on. And if you ever watch the Dream of Jeannie in reruns, you'll see Barbara's navel.
I'm sure she's delighted that you're telling this story.
Anyway, this movie is a crazy movie, and just simply, Peter Bonner has an affair with a girl in the office. Her husband, she catches him in a real deep kiss with the girl, and then it goes on from there. Well, let's run this. This is just a short take from How to Break Up a Happy
Divorce.
How to Break Up a Happy Divorce. I think it is.
It'll come up.
Okay. So you want to be?
That doesn't look at all like that.
Here we go.
There's something I have to tell you. Oh, not now, Claire. Oh, I'm gonna run. It's too late. I want a divorce. What? I want a divorce. I marry Jennifer from my office. He wants to marry Jennifer from down at the office. What's that? He wants a divorce.
Well, let him have it.
This was directed by Jerry Paris, who did a lot of the Happy Days episodes and stuff. And this is not the end. This scene goes on with the banging, the screaming, and the music goes up in the air. It's crazy.
Please welcome one of the most wonderful and charming people who's ever been on television and who we love to see all the time, the most charming genie ever, Barbara.
No belly button. Oh my.
Barbara,
Chuck.
was it difficult to knowing that there will be no laugh track? Was it difficult to do your comedic timing without knowing there would be a laugh track?
Are you asking me a question? Because
Actually, I'm sorry. What?
That's what she got. Please.
Actually, it wasn't difficult. They're talking. I'm not going to say anything.
It's okay.
Where's your baton?
Yes.
I have a problem with my hearing. I have to admit this here. I can't, Barbara. It's difficult for me sometimes to hear on amplified sound. So you can't ask me questions because you can't answer them.
Okay.
You might not want the answer anyway.
That's all right. I live with it.
I even said I have the answer.
Well, actually, the timing wasn't difficult because I worked with Larry Hagman. And it was just, for some reason, thank you, Lord, we were in sync. Everything was wonderful with Larry. Other things not so hot, but but the acting was perfect. I don't know, Chuck, if you can't hear this, maybe I shouldn't tell the story.
Oh, you better tell it.
Well, tell the story.
We can hear
Now we
it.
can downjoy it. I think you told me on the phone.
Yeah, probably. Long time before we did I Dream of Jeannie. no, not I Dream of Jeannie, before we did the movie, during I Dream of Jeannie, Larry had told me, now every morning, check off what time you come to work, when you have lunch, when you have a break, and when you get back to work. Keep a record. I faithfully kept a record. I do what I'm told, usually. So I had a record. And for 3 years, I kept the record. And Larry would come on the set, and he'd say, hey, look at this, I have overtime. Look
I'm
at
not
this.
responsible for this.
I know you're not. But you poor thing, you got the brunt of it. and I'd say, you got an overtime? I didn't get an overtime check. And then, it took me a little while to realize I was working longer than Larry was, because I had to be in at 6 a.m. and I had to do the special effects stuff. And so I talked to my agent about it. My agent talked to Columbia, Screen Gems, and they said, oh, we're computing it. Now, this is 3 years. 3 years into it. So then I forgot about it. Okay, people are taking care of everything. The agent's taking care of it, you know. About 4 months later, Larry came on the set again. I got an overtime check, you know, and he's showing me this check. And I thought, what happened? And I called my agent, and he said, well, I don't know. They're you know, it's a big studio. So I called my friend and attorney, Joe Tabak, who happened to also know some of the guys in the legal department at Columbia. And he called them and said, now this is the situation. Barbara has all her records, and she hasn't had her overtime. So, okay, I gave him my records. He gave them to the attorneys. And I didn't let it go as long this time. About 4 weeks later, I said, Joe, what's happening? He said, they're computing it. I said, oh, okay, they're computing it. So one day, I was in makeup, and Vesuvius came up, and I started to cry. And the poor guy doing my makeup, it was terrible, because he'd try to put makeup on, the mascara would come down, you know. And he said, Barbara, what's the matter? And I said, I think I'm sick. And he said, oh, okay. And he went over to the phone, and then he called down to Tommy McCrory at the studio, on the set, and he said, Barbara's sick. And Tommy said, well, what's wrong? Why is she sick? And the makeup guy turned around and asked me, he said, how are you sick? Where are you sick? I said, because I don't have my overtime. and Tom said, okay, hung up the phone. And as it happens, Jackie Cooper was out of town. So guess who got that call? Poor Chuck. But what he said to me on the phone was, Barbara, don't you trust me? And I said, no!
She was crying. I mean, how can you, when a woman cries, what happens to a guy falls apart?
I was so frustrated.
On the other line, it wasn't me, it was Seymour Friedman.
You're right. It was Seymour Friedman. But guess what? I got a check in the makeup department for half. So how did they know half? That's what I'm wondering. And how did Seymour know?
We always paid our bills.
Well,
I love you.
Thank you.
I didn't know if you can remember that. It's actually, if you buy the book, you'll get my rendition of this story. Because it's in the book.
Barbara, we just want you to know there's free food and drink after this. So